Chapter 5, Entry Permits and Procedures. There are several different ways to do an entry permit, and if you've been around for a while, you've probably seen them all. With that said, whether they're digital or they're paper, the information should be relatively the same. So let's go through each of the 9 components and briefly talk about the information required for each of these 9 components. Component 1, identification information. On whatever permit that you're using, there should be a mixture of these 3 questions: the permit number, the location of the confined space, and a brief description or overview of the workspace. Component 2, purpose of entry. In this section, this is where you start to get a little bit specific about the work that you're doing. So for under task description, ensure that you write down what is it exactly that you're doing inside of the confined space. And for authorized personnel, at a minimum, there should be an attendant, an entrant, and a supervisor. But this is the area where you list all names involved. Component 3 deals with hazard identification and control measures. This section is for the team to identify all of the potential hazards and then assign effective control measures to help mitigate those hazards. Component 4, atmospheric testing. Confined space entry requires atmospheric testing. This is the section where you're going to write down your results. So for any permit required confined space, don't forget to test the upper atmosphere, the middle atmosphere, and the bottom atmosphere of the confined space where workers are going to go. And as for continuous monitoring, this is the section where you describe how you're going to monitor during the entire entry. Component 5, safety equipment. What this section is for is explaining all of the personal protective equipment that's needed for a safe entry and exit of a confined space. I'll note as well, any of the PPE that is required for entry should be based on the pre-entry hazard assessment. Even so, don't forget to talk about what exactly you have on site for any rescue equipment. Component 6, communication and coordination. So essentially the communication plan is how is the entrant and the attendant going to maintain a level of communication throughout the entire duration of a confined space entry. Even so, if something does happen and help is needed, make sure that emergency contacts are filled out and the team members have been briefed on who to call. Component 7, entry and exit procedures. The entry procedures are essentially what are the procedures that we have to follow when entering a confined space. With that said, the exit procedures are what are the procedures that we have to do in order to exit the confined space. Component 8, authorization. This is where the entry supervisor comes into play. That's because the entry supervisor has to authorize that the permit is not only filled out, but it's accurate and complete. Authorization of a permit should always be made with the entry supervisor's signature. For entry duration, don't forget to specify how long the permit is valid for. If the time elapses and work still needs to be done, a new permit must be completed. Component 9, post-entry review. This is the section where the entire team's going to come together, review the entry process from beginning to end, notate any discrepancies, verify that the work has been completed, and that the space is safe to close. The very last step is canceling the permit, and this should only be done by the entry supervisor after work has been completed. What I find interesting is how each of these components work together to protect all parties involved through 4 essential functions. Number 1, ensure safety by verifying all safety measures and procedures are not only in place, but are effective before entry into a confined space. Number 2, controlling access to regulate and document all persons who enter and exit a confined space. Number 3, identify and communicate any potential hazards that are present in the confined space or have the potential to be in the confined space. And number 4, compliance. This is where we're going to make sure that we're following all appropriate standards, including all university guidelines.